Okay, very good. Here we go. So good morning to everybody. Let's jump right back into it. The last thing we learned at the very end of it was Sif phase, and we had talked about that even if the food is fully cooked, you're not allowed to do hatmana on Shabbos, as we've already said a number of times. Even if it's a situation where it's placed into or on top of a davar she'eino mosif hevel, which does not increase heat, nonetheless, you still can't do it. But we said that we carved out an exception, which was that if you are doing this to protect it from rodents or to protect it from dirt and the like, then you can do this because your kavana is not to retain the heat. Your kavana is simply, your intention is simply to protect the food from something external. Okay, that was the exception we carved out last time. Not so sure how often that's going to help us on a practical level, but nonetheless.
Around here have been having epidemics of ants, little ants on their countertops. Yeah.
In the kitchen.
Yeah.
Ooh.
So I guess that's.
We had at a certain point those little sugar ants, but they were hanging out in the living room.
They come out.
We dealt with them.
Rains.
Yeah. Yeah, you're talking about these little ones, the tiny ones, not the carpenter ants.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. The little babies.
Okay.
So
Okay, so there you go. So that's if you're having that issue, you're watching this right now, and you have that issue. You have the ants are crawling around in your kitchen. You can take the food. Not in a davar shemosi pedal, but if it's eino mosel, you want to hide it in a pillowcase or something like that. I would recommend just putting it in a Ziploc at that point. But nonetheless, and I don't think Ziploc constitutes hatmana because it's not like wrapped tightly around it. I guess you could. Nonetheless, okay. So that's what we talked about last time. We're going to now begin with Sif Gimel. Sif Gimel, I admit, it's not the most. It's not the most interesting of things to talk about in the sense. Yeah.
You said we could do that before Shabbat start, right? And
yes, if it's eino mosif hevel before Shabbat,
right? Then you can move it.
Right. Right. Yes. Yes, and we'll talk a little more about that when we get to Sif Dalet. Sif Gimel is not as interesting, I admit, in the sense that it's very descriptive about things that are mosif hevel and things that are not mosif hevel. So let's begin. Elu Haim Devarim Hamosifim Hevel. These are the things that are in the category of Mosif Hevel. They are they increase the heat. They add heat. Where it says Kuf Chet, I hear, and 4 lines from the end of the Shulchan Aruch towards the top of the page. So these are the things that add heat. Solet shel zaitim, that's the olive scraps, right? The solet probably means like refuse, the refuse of the olives, leftovers. Oh, shel shumshamin, the refuse, the leftovers of sesame. I'm not so familiar with the obviously I know sesame seeds, but the sesame plants, I don't know. I'm not so sure if I'm aware of like what it looks like, but whatever. You'll understand the idea in a moment. Vizevel, manure. Okay, so if you you do hatmana in manure, just know that it's mostly hevel, which is true. I mean, we know that from gardening that undoubtedly that's you put it in a particular area. It's that I think that helps things decompose and whatever and go through its processes. I'm not surprised at all that that's included in the list here. V'melach, salt, v'sid, lime, v'chol, sand. Those things, bein lachen, bein yeveshim, whether these substances we just described are moist or they are dry, Either way, hatmana with these substances is called mosif hevel. Now, this is a list really from the Gemara in Hilchot Shabbat. I wouldn't. I don't think it's as relevant probably in many of our scenarios today. I don't know that many of us have piles of salt or lime or sand that we readily put food in, to retain the heat. And the way we heat things up today is so different because of the advances in technology, obviously. But this is in the times of the Mishnah, in the times of the Gemara. This would have been very relevant, and I'm sure that they based this on their life experience. Right? They didn't just suddenly randomly throw things out. Chazal, believed in trial and error the way we do as well. You learn from things that you do, and you realize, oh, that actually made it hotter. So again, I don't think they're making up things out of thin air. Sometimes they had certain beliefs in terms of medicine and whatnot that for sure are not correct, or outdated medicine. But that was the medicine of their time. But this is just based on probably life experience for them. Now,
By zevel, they mean mulch.
yeah, like fertilizer or something like that. Yeah,
Instead of
yeah. It sounds a little better. Yeah. Shum sesame. That's why of today a Sesame Street. Rechov Sumsum.
Oh,
It's yeah, yeah. Shum Shumin Sumsum. Yeah, it's sesame. Viteven vizogin umochin ve'asavin. If you have here, so teven is straw. Zagin are grape skins, leftovers. The refuse after you've made wine, the scraps that are extra. You have mochin, which are what did he say again? The Mishnah Berurah. Okay, anything that's soft. Okay, so anything that is soft, right? And the Mishnah Berurah is going to give a very tight definition or examples of that. Things that are soft. He's going to go. One example is like cotton. Cotton is one example. Things that are soft. The asavim, that's grass. So these. Now you're going to ask a question here. When these three items are moist, now you should ask a question immediately. That last list was not a list of three; it was a list of four. So how come he's saying bisman shloshtan lachin? So I'll give it away already. Let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah very quickly. Yud Ches shloshtan chashiv leteven v'zagin kechadam. Obviously, he's considering straw and the grape refuse that's left over after you use the wine press as one. Okay, fine. I guess he sees them as very similar, straw, and I'm not sure what makes them similar, but I'm not going to lose my mind over this one. I'll let it go. And so these substances need to be moist. If they're dry, by implication, if they're dry, then it doesn't increase the heat. Only when these are moist. Okay, we'll talk about a little machlokas relates to that in a moment. The Mishnah Berurah brings up. Let's read now. Let's go back in the Mishnah Berurah to Ted Vav. Oshel Shum Shum. Talking about the sesame. Even though with regards to hatmana, with regards to the hiding, right? The word matmin means to hide it, right? That's what hatmin means to hide. So with regards to hiding it away, right? To be hatmana, inside something, right? The law is the same across the board. So I place the pot of food inside a pile of sesame refuse, or olive refuse, or salt. I put it inside, so it's completely enveloped. A big pile of it, and I bury it inside. That is across the board the same halacha, and it's not allowed. There is a difference, though. When it comes to sesame, and that's really with all the other matters, all the other substances that are mentioned here. When is it a problem? When you specifically do hatmana within, a pile of it, right? It's not on top, but in it. Let's say you do hatmana in a pillow. Okay? It's a mosif hevel, a pillowcase. And then you take that, so that's a davar hamut. Could go in here, he used bekupa shel tzemer. Okay, a box of cotton, a box of wool. Yeah, put a bunch of wool around it.
But I thought it was prohibited to wrap it up in any.
Well, let's assume here not Erev Shabbos into Shabbos, right? On Shabbos, you can't do it. You're right. But let's say Erev Shabbos into Shabbos. So if it's Mosif Hevel, you can't do it. If it's Eino Mosif Hevel, you can. So let's say you do it in a kupa shel tzemer, a box of wool. Muter lahaniach hakupa alen. So now I'm allowed to put the box of wool with the pot in it on top of the sesame, right? Not in the sesame, not in a pile of sesame, not in a pile of salt. I can put it on top of the pile of salt. Aval al gefes shel zaysim. But if it's gefes shel zaysim, aser lahaniach. But if I have the olive scraps, they're even putting it on top. That's the one exception where they say aser lahaniach. That I'm not even allowed to put it on top.
So the idea is that these items are for him ever.
This item, the olive scraps, is mostly. I'll take a look what he says. He continues to say this here. Dechamim eitve, olive scraps, which are again going through their natural processes as they are decomposing, I guess, and they're producing heat. They are very hot, apparently, olive scraps. And again, I would imagine they would have. This was something from lived experience. They don't just make this up out of thin air. That there's an exception here by the olives. Mosifin hevel lamala derech hakupa la kadera, and they increase heat upwards in derech hakupa up against the box, which ultimately leha kadera goes to the kadera, the pot that's inside the box of cotton, the woolen box, and it increases the heat in there. So this will be a situation of davar hamosif hevel, even when it's not buried in, but I did hatmana on something, and then I put it on top of something hot. This is a very relevant case, despite the fact that it seems very irrelevant. Because I don't know how many of you have olive piles and olive scraps in your backyard that you pile up so high that you could actually really do hatmana. This is like putting it on a hot plate, though, on Shabbos, where if you take something and you wrap it in a towel, and then you put it on top of a warming tray or a hot plate on Shabbos, this is the equivalent, because that is increasing heat onto the towel, and the towel onto the pot that's inside of it. So it's the same halacha, and that's why even if you're doing hatmana in a davar she'eino mosif hevel, like a towel, and then you put it on the hot plate, that's not okay, even though it's not inside the hot plate. Obviously, it's not possible. I mean, it's not inside the, as is being constructed in the case of davar mosif hevel, which are all across the board not okay, like the pile of sesames. That's when it's inside. When it's on top, that's
totally that towel or whatever material is more of an insulating material from the heat source.
you're saying it's insulating it.
Yeah, it's reducing the amount of heat that will get, as opposed to putting right on top of the hot plate, for example.
Oh yeah, for sure. The hot plate will heat it up very quickly.
Right. So
Yeah.
I mean, I don't understand why this would be a negative.
So Tommy's asking why is this not why is this a negative that let me just make sure I understand correctly. Why is it not a negative that putting it on top of the olive scraps or the other ones?
Oh, you gave the example of the
Hot plate, yes. Correct. I'm not saying that the olives will. I never tried this, but I doubt a pile of olives is as effective as heating things up as a hot plate.
Right.
But the point is that their lived experience was that it did in some way add some degree of heat to it. The pot.
So you take a pot,
Yeah.
all the towel.
Yes.
Then put it on top of the heating source, whatever that is.
Right.
Or olives, whatever. That towel will prevent the heat in full strength to come into the pot.
Right.
As opposed to putting the pot right on top of it. So in a way,
You're saying it's not even helping.
it's the other way around. Not only that it helps,
Interesting.
but it's
Tommy's
Same
pointing
way.
out just for Steve. Tommy's pointing out if you take a towel and you wrap a pot in a towel, and you put it on the hot plate, it actually won't get as hot as if you just put the pot directly on the hot plate. That's what you're saying, right?
Not really, because if you don't have the towel there, the heat will escape off the top of the pot eventually. You have the towel, it keeps the heat, it retains the heat,
So you're saying it increases and retains the heat.
right?
But you put all around the bottom.
No, but eventually the towel will heat up and the thing that envelops the towel that envelops the pot will keep that heat in the pot
Right.
more readily than if it's not there.
Right.
But if you have
Right.
a towel,
Sorry, you want to see?
if you have a towel and you just put it on top of the pot,
Yeah.
not enveloping on all four sides,
On the three sides that are not.
on the three sides, and the pot's bottom sits on the hot plate.
Right,
That's
that
not good.
that is also Atmana, and that could be where the case. Thank you, Steve. Yeah, that could be the case where it increases the heat and it's retaining the heat, so the temperature is going to be much higher. Yeah. Okay. Look, this is halacha. I tried to make a little connection to the hot plate, but the original here is olive scraps. Tezvav. Oh, sorry, Tez Zion. Teven. So the straw. Beid imhu aroch. Whether the straw is a long piece of straw, oh nachtach lechatichos dakos, or it's cut up into very small, fine pieces. Vizagin, and he just tells us here, vizagin. What's zagin? Zagin psolas shel yekev yayin. It's the scraps from the wine press. Okay, so what you left over after you squeezed all the grapes, the scraps, they probably get thrown out. Yeah, if you pile it up, you can actually warm things up, or at least retain the heat very well with a little increasing heat from the grape scraps. Okay, Yud Zayin Umochin. Okay, Mochin was one of those in the category that if it's moist, then it can be most of hevel, but if not moist, it's not. What's Mochin? It says here, Kol davarach korori Mochin. Anything that is soft is called Mochin. Use the word Gemara, when the Gemara uses the word moch, it's like a cloth, so which makes sense. Cloth, usually we think of as something soft. So what's the example here? Could go on semer gefen. Semer gefen is cotton. Okay, so cotton. So if you're using cotton, apparently, if you place something into a pile of cotton, I don't have experience. This doesn't sound.
It's wet.
If it's wet, I guess take a bunch of cotton balls and you make a big pile of cotton balls and they're wet. But you'll see here the question about the wet, is it wet from its own internal self, or is it wet because somebody added something? Machlokas, whether or not that most of it. We'll talk about that in a moment. Okay, let's work with this over a second. Yeah, it's probably unprocessed, exactly. As I said there, unprocessed, yeah. I imagine if you have cotton balls, I can't imagine you take a pile of cotton balls and you put a pot inside the cotton balls that's going to do anything.
I can't imagine they had cotton balls then.
Right, exactly. They didn't have cotton balls, as Steve points out. Yes.
Just Q-tips.
Q-tip. They only had Q-tips, exactly. If you have the wool that is torn from a lamb, the talush means to remove. It's taken from a little behema, meaning probably like a lamb, and it's soft. Okay. Ugariras begodim beluyim. The shredding, garurs to like shred or to like drag something. So the shredding of clothing, beluyim that is worn out. Balui means worn out. Okay, so you take your leftover clothing and it's all torn up. Today, for some reason, if you tear your clothing, it's actually more expensive. You can charge double for pants that are torn. I don't understand this concept. I really don't get it. If I could buy it myself, take scissors and cut, and it would be cheaper to do it that way. But if you buy it pre-cut, I for the life of me have not understood this since I was a teenager. I don't understand why people buy. If you want to cut it, okay, it's a style. But that you buy torn clothing makes no sense to me. Okay.
Now you're speaking like a rabbi.
One time. I don't understand this. Okay. Okay, we talked about Yud Ches, Yud Tes, Lachin. These 3 or 4 substances, if they're moist, they are Mosif Hevel. So, and remember, think of it in terms of cotton, by the way, unprocessed cotton, probably. So what happens here? Lachin, what do we learn from this? The lachin yesh bahen hevel harbe yosim yivish. There's much more heat from things that are moist than, of course, if they're dry. That's not a surprising statement to me. Okay, fine. Umistima sa mechaber mashma, and from the way the mechaber, the Shulchan Aruch, just leaves it plain. He doesn't go into this issue that we're about to talk about. Leaves it as is. Debein lachin machmasatzman, whether it's moist because of itself. We know some substances out there, they have produce moisture. Bein lachin machmas davracher, or whether it's wet or it's moist because something else moistened it. Shnehem asurin. If these items are moist, no matter how they became moist, they are dvarim hamosifim hevel. Omnam, he acknowledges though, kama achronim hiskimu. Only if it's if it in itself produces moisture. Because when it's producing moisture on its own, it has greater heat, it has a higher heat than if it is moist as a result of some other liquid that fell upon it, than if it were. And then certainly where it was dry and then it became moist because something was poured on it. Okay, so just saying whether it's moist naturally from its, how it is out in the field, versus rain fell on this dry substance and now it's moist because of the rain. So some want to differentiate between the two. The Mishnah Berurah seems to imply that the Shulchan Aruch doesn't delve into this, meaning he says, doesn't matter, moist is moist. I'm not going to spend too much time on that because of its practical relevance. If you happen to run into a scenario, you'll have to go back and look it up. It's not, this is not something that I keep implanted in my head. I think I've learned this sin before when I was in Smicha. I didn't remember all this. This is not, it doesn't stick out. It's not easy to apply directly back to our lives. Take a look at the Mishnah, the Shulchan Aruch now back up on top, second to last line on the page. Here's your list of things that don't increase heat. Ksus, peiros, v'kanfeyona, ushar notzos. So you have a list here. What's the list? The list is, you have here ksus, clothing. Share ksus v'ona from the Torah. Clothing. Peiros, fruits. Now you're like, wait a minute, you just listed to me olives. Which I don't know, you can argue, is that peiros or not? By the way, for purposes of brachos, we would say it's peiros. Anything that grows from a tree or grows from the ground, we call it pri ha'etz or pri ha'adama, the fruit of the tree or the fruit of the ground. So here, we'll have to talk about what are peiros, okay? Because we already listed olives as being mosifim hevel. Shum shemin are mosifim hevel. So I imagine that there are other. It can't be this is a full list. There must be other substances that when you pile them up, they would be increasing heat. Okay, so what are peiros? The kanfeyona. What are kanfeyona? Feathers, the wing, the feathers of a dove. Right? It's like a down blanket, it's warm. Okay. But it's not it's retaining heat. That's why a down blanket is really effective, because it retains your body heat. Right, and so you feel extra warm at night when you have a down blanket. It's feathers. Oshar notzos, or other, what's added in here. The Rama says, any other feathers. Really does the same thing, and that's from Moreno Harav Rabbi Avraham Bahagos. Okay, that comes from Rabbi Avraham in his gloss. Okay, so we're not done here. Let's keep going. Una ores shel pishtan. If I have worn linen fibers. Pishtan is linen, right? So semer upishtim, right? That's wool and linen, right? So pishtan here, linen, and it's like worn out linen. Okay, they're gonna say here, dak shena orin sheno arin in pishtan, because lina air means to shake. So it's the thing, if you shake wool, if you shake linen, It's the kind of the scraps that fall off of it. And if you get enough of them and you make a pile out of it, this is ain't a mosifim hevel, but it perhaps retains heat nicely. If it's piled up. Una sores shel charashin. Here you have the shavings of a carpenter. They explain here, perish hakash hadak hanofel min ha'etz kishemigaret oto b'magaret. It's the shavings that fall off of wood. Turn it the other way in this one over here. That fall off the tree or the wood when you are cutting. When you're doing this motion, your migarer is to drag. When you're dragging back and forth with a migarer, with a migera is a saw. Okay, so you can think about it. When you're sawing, there's the what do you call it? the wood dust or something like that. Sawdust. Thank you, sawdust. Right? If you pile up big scraps of sawdust, I really don't recommend this because that's stuff on the top of your pot, and it falls into the food after you open it up. I would stay away from this. But if you have a pile of sawdust and you want to retain the heat, apparently it does a good job retaining, but not adding heat to things that are inside of it. Tosfos adds here, and this is a pella, this is a mystery here. Yesh Omrim, there's those that have the opinion. This is Tosfos who has this opinion. The mutter lahatme besloim. I'm allowed to do hatmana in rocks. Afal pisha mosifim hevel. Even though rocks, apparently, if you're a nice pile of rocks, not with holes, if you're able to pile up rocks in a way that it really is enclosed, apparently it's mosifim hevel. I don't know if that's the case. I'm not sure. Is that really true? I don't know. Why is this allowed though? If it's mosifim hevel, if it really is mosifim hevel, should be usher. Why is it mutter? The milsa de lo shchicha, because it's so abnormal to do that. It is completely abnormal to take a pile of rocks and to be matmin your food in a pile of rocks. 21st century cynic in me says, all of these things are not normal. Right. Okay. But at least in those days, the other things were somewhat normal, or at least not unheard of, but apparently rocks were unheard of. Lo goes through Rabbanan. So the rabbis did not include that in their gzeira because it was so abnormal that no one would have ever thought to do it. So if you do it though, apparently it would be okay. Don't worry, the Mishnah Berurah will do away with this in a minute. Okay, take a look. Go back to the Mishnah Berurah. Sif Chaf. Ksus, clothing. V'huadin karim. Uksasos, pillows, and a mattress, right? Karim, uksasos, pillows and and blankets, or not blankets. It's the cushion. That's what the word cushion. Kesses, the uksasos are cushions. So you want to put it in your couch cushion, right? So begizet semer, the shearings of wool. These are all like clothing. Okay. Peiros, what are peiros here? Not everything is peiros. So he gives an example here. Kegon chitin v'kitnios. Again, these are not fruits per se in the way we call it fruits. Chitin are things that grow from the ground. Wheat, if you have a pile of wheat, or you have a pile of kitnios, legumes, that's eina mosif. But again, it could be that you have certain things like olives we talked about. The scraps of olives are mosif and hevel. I'm not so sure. Again, if you're able to compost certain things, then the reality is it is mostly hevel, right? I just don't know. I guess maybe these things, wheat. I'm not an expert at this. Wheat and the scraps of beans. I guess that they don't add heat in their experience, Chazal's experience. Again, I don't know if anyone's here going to ever try this. If you do, you'll come back to us and you'll let us know what happened. No, this is not. They probably still do things like this that we just pretend that those parts of the world don't exist. Yes, there are probably parts of the world where they. Again, I don't know if the Jewish communities are doing this. I'm not being realistic. The Jewish communities, for the most part, have moved to bigger cities out there in the world. They don't live in too much in farm country. And even those who are in Israel who are farmers, I doubt that they're using these methods to heat things up. Okay, Oshar Notzos, other feathers. The Nakad Mitchila Kanfeyona, Kanfeyona, dove, feathers were mentioned first. Because that's what it says in the Gemara. Mishum Dahaya Matsuilahem, because that was common for them. They had dove feathers. That was what was, the common feather of choice for whatever reasons that you needed feathers. Okay. Chav Gimel. Neores, this is about the flax, as I mentioned before. Dak shenorim in apishtan. It's the little thin pieces that fall off the linen when you're shaking it off. So if you make a pile out of that, it's Einam or Sif Havel. Turn over the page. Told you this wasn't the most exciting simon or sif. Bisloim, rocks. Hainu avanim kitanim. We're talking about tiny little rocks. It says kufches with 2 dots now on the top. Okay, you see that? You're gonna turn it. You're on the right there with the 2 dots. Yeah, so right here. Baslaim. That's it. We're talking about little rocks. Shemosifin mehen eish. Sorry, shemotziin mehen eish, which they would use. The cavemen would use. I guess they bring forth fire from these rocks. The Korino-san avnei eish, and they were nicknamed fire rocks. They didn't have fire in them. That was the 7th plague. That when the hail fell from the sky, it's described that there was a fire inside it. It's not saying there's a fire inside it. They would use these kinds of rocks to bring forth fire.
Like flint.
Flints.
Like flint, exactly. Like flint.
Yeah.
Like the Flintstones, exactly. Exactly. Yes. Umasha Kosav Delo Shricha. So again, I don't know if is that really the case, by the way, that if you take flint and you pile it up and you put something inside of it, that it's gonna helps you create a fire. I don't know that it helps you add heat. I don't know, man. Maybe I'm just off my game here because I have no idea on the mitzias of this.
But aren't we talking about things that don't add heat?
So, but no, the Ramah had said with the rocks, even though it's Mosif and Hevel, the Ramah said it is Mosif Hevel, the rocks. I would have thought, you're right. I would have said 100%. Oh, maybe it's Eina Mosif and Hevel. Okay, you put a pile of rocks together, you put something inside. Okay, it'll retain the heat. The rocks are very cold. I would have thought that would not help with the process of retaining heat. But nonetheless, he goes as far as saying it's Mosif Hevel. That's what Tosfos says. Umasha Kosav Delo Shchicha. Assuming it's Mosif Hevel, the fact that it's not normal, it's not common. Hainu, the Hog should lo shchiach klal shiat bislan. It's not normal at all. That's what he means to be matmin in rocks. Mishum shemishabrim hakadera, because rocks could break the kadera, right? O shemekalkelin hamachal, or it'll ruin the food. But the sawdust apparently didn't ruin the food.
Compost won't ruin the food.
Yeah, compost won't. Aval davar shelifamim. If it's something that sometimes occasionally is used to do hatmana, it's not common. That's where the rabbinic zera does take effect. Rocks apparently were so abnormal that you wouldn't even call them, uncommon. You would say that that's something never is done. Again, I don't know what to do with this. This is I don't understand the Metzias in a realistic way here. But the bottom line is that it's so abnormal that apparently that it's okay to do Hatmana because there was no Gzeira on that. I'm not sure that there's any substance today that we can easily say, that you can you do Hatmana. Today it's abnormal to do in any of these things. So I'm not so sure that we can start to be Machalek to really differentiate between categories. If you happen to have rocks and you want to try this out, don't blame me when your lunch is cold. Okay. Kosav Rashal B'Tshuva, the Marshal Shlomo Luria writes in a tshuva of his, Efer Cham. This is more interesting. Let's say you have Efer Cham. So it's hot ashes. Okay. You have hot ashes. So obviously the fire had just been on. Now it's just ash though. So hu davar she'ena mosif hevel. It's not mosif hevel. It's hot, but it's not adding. It's imagine here the olives are the olives are going through a composting process where it's almost like a fire is on, right? There's an increasing heat. The Efer Cham is cooling down, right? Maybe it's hot right now, but it's only cooling down. It's not Mosif Hevel. It may heat things up for a moment, but it's really the temperature is coming down on this thing. So Vishari Litmobo, so it's permissible again Erev Shabbos and the Shabbos to do Hatmana in such a pile of hot ashes.
It's like sawdust, basically.
Basically, except it's the sawdust. It's the fire of saw. It's the sawdust of the fire. Yeah. Elaim kain me'urav b'kachon. But if it's mixed with coals, then it's a different story. Then you can't do this. V'heviuhu aliyah. So therefore, again, so if you have a pile of ashes, go to town. I don't recommend it on a not on a halachic level. I don't recommend it on a practical level. But again, it's interesting because there it's something that's hot, but it is decreasing its heat as it goes. Now you could put something into Erev Shabbos into Shabbos. But again, if it's mixed with coals, no. Even though the ashes are, they themselves are not going to increase heat. The coals, even though they're kind of burning out, the coals, we don't like those again because of the whole fear of stoking the coals. You have others other achronim who bring this. Who are then the bechol davar she'ena mosif hevel filuhem chamim shari. This is important. Again, if things are ena mosif hevel, even though they're hot right now, it is permissible. It's still considered ena mosif hevel. It's only mosif hevel if it's like the olives and they're composting. It's almost like it's an oven that it itself is increasing heat, the substance itself. If it's hot but it's decreasing, that's called einam mosif hevel. So if you have, let's say, an electric blanket, by the way, I'm not sure, so from a safety perspective that this is recommended. I'm just making up a case in my head. If you have an electric blanket, it's plugged in before Shabbos, so you heat it up to its highest, whatever. You wrap up some food in the electric blanket, unplug it before Shabbos. If it's plugged in, it's mosif hevel. Now it's hot, but its heat will only decrease with time. That could be a way that you keep food hot on Friday nights for enough time that by the time people come back from shul and sit down, it'll still be nice and warm. Okay, that's about as relevant and practical as I could make this sit. Okay, let's go to Dalit. Back up on top. We'll have to learn something a little more. Let's get a little more relatable. Okay. And by the way, there are still a lot to go in the topic of Hatmana. We're not close to the end here. Even though the halacha is very clear, you're not allowed to do Hatmana on Shabbos. Even if it's a davar she'ein mosif hevel. We talk about that's a rabbinic zera. That they didn't want you to do it, but davar mosif hevel. If you do hatmana in something that is not increasing heat, Friday afternoon, and then Friday night you uncover. Let's say it's let's just make it simple. You wrap it in a towel. You uncover this pot from that towel on Friday night, presumably either to take some of the contents of the food out, or it fell off, right? It wasn't wrapped very tightly, and then somebody passed by and they knocked it off, or you're moving something else and you knock it off by accident, whatever it is. After Shabbos had started, it was revealed. You need gala. It was opened. Mutter lachazor v'lachasos. You're allowed to put the towel back in place, cover it back up as it was before. If that was the case on Shabbos by itself, like that, you had started doing it on Shabbos without having a previous, having it been covered previously, that would not be allowed. But since it was previously, done properly, you're allowed to recover things on Shabbos if it's Eina Mosif Hevel. And if you want to add on Shabbos, you can add. So if your thing is already wrapped in a towel, and you want to take 3 more towels and wrap it up further to further retain the heat, you're allowed to do that. More heterim here. You want to take the whole towel off, not just it was opened up. I'm going to take it out of the whole towel. And I want to take a new towel and take the new towel and have that wrapped around this. So I'm allowed to do that. Bein sheharishon, that's very importantly here. Bein sheharishon cham, yoser mehasheni. Bein shehasheni cham, yoser meharishon. Whether the first one was hot, more hot than the second one, or the second one was more hot than the first one. You could think. I go back to living in Washington Heights. We had I think I've talked about this before. We had a huge radiator, right? The heat was like steam, right, in this old apartment, and on top of one of our steam heaters, they had placed a wooden, almost like a box. That way, like nobody would touch it and burn themselves. They tried to make it decorative. Okay, so but there was it was like almost like a bench, so you could put things on top of it. Now on Shabbos it didn't get so hot, but enough that if I put a towel on it, it might get a little warm. So let's say I have doing hatmana, in a towel, and I had heated that towel up before Shabbos, and it's been now an hour into Shabbos, it's cooled down already, and now I have a towel that's has a little bit of heat because it was sitting on top of the radiator. So now I can switch the towel, even though this one is hot and the first one is cooled down completely, and now I am more effectively retaining heat. That's allowed according to what we just read. So again, I'm not so sure this is still any level of relevance in the way that we do things, but nonetheless, it's interesting here because there's more. We're getting some heterim, some wiggle room when it comes to Eina Mosed Hevel on Shabbos. Okay. Continuing in the shul.
Strange question.
Yeah.
Because I've done this. I don't know whether it was
Yeah.
possible. I forget to put something in an oven.
Yeah.
And I want it warmed up. And it's the middle of the summer. My house is air conditioned.
Sure.
I've taken it out and put it outside and let the sun warm it.
Ooh, that's a great question.
Is that okay?
So this is the future question of halacha. So when we get to the siman about bishul in about 3 or 4 years, Shin Yud Ches, it's a while from here.
It's just to warm it up.
It says very. So we'll talk about this later, but I'll give you the short answer to your question. The Gemara says that Mita Oraisa, the kind of cooking that is not allowed is from fire, right? And then we also there's a gzeira, you're not allowed to have to cook mitoldos haor, which is the derivative, things that have been heated up by or, meaning by fire.
The answer is no.
No, listen. And we're also not allowed to cook in toldos hachama, things that have been heated up by the sun. But hold on. So for example, if you are able to harness the heat of the sun and it then heats something up enough that you could cook in this substance or in this whatever it is, that's not allowed. Why? It's a gzeira mishum toldos haor. Because we'll see in a moment. Chama, we'll talk about the sun in a second. Toldos hachama is a rabbinic gzeira. I mean, the derivative heat of the sun being used as a way to cook something is not allowed because it's very similar, because you could heat something up with a fire, the same item up as with heating up the sun. But from the sun, the heat from the sun. But if you cook directly in the sun, mefurash in the Gemara, it's mutter. If you take something outside in Phoenix, Arizona, it's 130 degrees, and you can harness the heat. Let's say you take, we watched this YouTube video in Shir one time. You take almost like a glass, like plastic, and you are able to hold it up to the sun in a way that it then focuses the sunlight on one spot, and you cook an egg using the sun. It is 100% mutter, not even a rabbinic decree. The rabbinic decree is on toldos hachama, that if the sun heats something else up, which then you cook in that, that's not allowed, because you could mimic that in a it with fire. You could heat the very same substance up with fire, but if it's directly from the sunlight, it is mutter. Yes, the rabbis of the Gemara talked about this topic. So the answer to your question is, if you put it outside, if it's mutter to cook,
Yes,
al
it's fully
achas
cooked.
kama v'kama. I'm saying if you're allowed to cook it outside, al achas kama v'kama, you're allowed to heat it up outside. So if you want to put it in the sun and it's heating up, I don't see that as a problem. I don't know. If that's the whopper of this whole sugya. You can cook on Shabbos if you cook with the sun. You have to harness the power, the heat of the sun. That's not so easy.
When you're cooking on Shabbat, it's cooking, that's actually the physical action of cooking.
Yeah.
It's
So
done on Shabbat, regardless it's on the sun or not.
right. So when the way that they understand Torah law here on this one about the process of cooking, which was again learned from the Malachos of Shabbos, I learned from the what was done in the Mishkan and the Beis Hamikdash. The way that they cooked in or baked was with a fire, right? What do we learn? We learned from the lechem apanim when they would bake the bread that was placed, the 12 loaves of bread that were placed out on the table that was across from the menorah. It was baked in an oven. Therefore, the only thing that is prohibited is cooking with a fire. Now, none of us in our wildest dreams could imagine cooking without a fire or something that has been heated up by a fire, right? So if you have a fire that heats up, like so let's say I'm not cooking it directly on the fire, I'm cooking it on the fire, and then there's a rack, okay, or not a rack, let's say there's a metal board on top. So the fire, but the metal board is being heated up by the fire, and then the metal board is what's cooking right. So then that's a derivative of fire, right? That's cooking. But if it's from the sun, the rabbis never made a rabbinic decree against it because they could never probably envision that somebody would ever harness the power of the sun. But today, you probably could do it. It's a real schlep. I don't see it as practical. Your guests, you could make eggs, 100%. Eggs are probably the one thing you could probably make pretty quickly in the sun.
Especially if you have sand underneath.
Right, exactly. And you can, if you are allowed to cook directly in the sun. It's a mission. I'm not sugarcoating this. So it's not the act of cooking. It's the act of cooking with a fire. It's just we can't envision any other way of cooking. So that's why we just say cooking is not allowed.
Well, are you extending that to solar panels, which harness the energy of the sun, and then you could use a solar panel?
Right. So the problem with so that's a good question. But the problem is if it can be also heated up with a fire, right? Toldo sachama, things that are derivative of the heat. So if you're using a solar panel, which has taken in the heat of the sun, then you take the solar panel and you put a pot on top of it in an attempt to cook. That I think is a problem because that's toldo sachama. That's by rabbinic law. It's a
derivative of the sun. It's not a derivative of fire.
You're right. So a derivative of the sun is not allowed. It has to be direct sun, right? That's why I'm saying if you take a piece of plastic or something like that and you're focusing there, but by there the panel gets heated up. Right? If you take a piece of, again, you take a plastic bubble almost, and then you have it designed in a way that it's almost like I didn't do these things. I know other kids who did these things. There's a plastic. You take a magnifying glass, and you can do horrible things to ants. I didn't do this. I promise you, it was not me. Other kids do these things, and so I witnessed them. And I was a little kid. I should have spoken up. I was not brave enough yet. Anyways, so you can harness the heat. It's not harnessed. You're taking the sunlight and you're focusing it on one spot. That's different than if you heat up a solar panel. I see that as very different. But if you're able to take, you harness it in a way that not harness, you focus the sunlight on one spot, you can get that very spot. That's one spot very hot where you can certainly cook an egg. So if you want to try this one time on Shabbos, by all means. But if your guests complain that you kept them waiting for their fresh eggs on Shabbos, don't blame me. I just said it was allowed, whether it's practical with your guests or not.
Make shakshuka on Shabbos.
You can make shakshuka on Shabbos. That's right.
You just set up.
You have to set up a whole contraption. That's what you would need a whole contraption that's set up in order to make this happen.
We can use mirrors.
It's-
Mirrors will-
Yeah.
But I'm sure one day they'll come up with it.
All right.
And save energy.
No, they'll tell me today. They'll probably they'll say no. It's us, sir. Because I told you here first. There's a Mishnah in Shabbos. You can't argue with it. It says it. Chama is mutter. Okay. All right. It's a cool. By the way, as much as I'm being a little bit whatever about it, it is an interesting discussion amongst the poskim about the status of, as a result of this whole discussion, as their status of a microwave. Because the heat in a microwave is not a fire. How does it heat up in a microwave? It uses it uses waves. Microwave. It's what is it? Magnetic. It's not a fire. No, utilizing a microwave is problematic because we're using electricity to do that. But in of itself, a microwave, which may be interesting in terms of, let's say, if you had a non-Jew heated it up under a certain circumstance, is that considered bishul? So that's interesting. Also, that comes up by the question of microwaves in terms of bishul akum. Let's say in a restaurant, something is cooked, using the word cooked here, in a microwave. And it was otherwise would have been bishul akum if it had been cooked in an oven. Is that considered bishul? Because it's not really using the method of a fire or things that are heated up by fire. So is a microwave chama? Do we equate it to like the sun? Or is that not? Because it's hard to say it's toldos chama. It's not heated up by the sun, and it's not heated up by a fire. So what is it? Right? And so that's a debate amongst poskim since the invention of the microwave. What is the halachic status of a microwave? There are people on both sides of this issue, as you can imagine, in terms of how it falls out. Bishul akum being a very practical question that relates to this. So when we get there, to the siman about bishul, and we talk about the sun, we'll mention microwaves. Okay. What time is it? 8:38. Okay. So let's pause here. And we'll continue next time, and we'll get into more depth about this whole idea of things that are uncovered, changing out to your dvarim she'ena mosif havel. Why is it allowed? Why is it okay?
So let me ask you, so the cooking it hot on Shabbat
Yeah,
in the sun, it's not, you can
cooking what on
on a pot. Name.
in the sun. I think it's fine. The point is that it's directly cooking onto it. No,
Right.
If you heat the pot up and then you take the pot inside and then you put the egg on top of it, that's a problem. But if the egg is there, the egg is being cooked by the sun. I think that it helps that you're saying that the pan getting hot too also helps the egg cook. Yeah, I hear you. I think it's not a problem because that's toldos hachama. It's a good question. I'm not so sure there are too many tshuvos about this question, but I have to look it up. I don't know. I still owe you an answer. I didn't get an answer yet about the challah being enveloped in let's say foil. Is that I'm going to get you that answer. It's on my list of questions. I'm still waiting to get back. All right, we'll stop here and.